Hello and welcome. My name is Courtney Chandrea, and I'm a writer, a consulting astrologer, an aspiring novelist, a homeschooling mom, and today we are talking about how to read when you have little time. All of those different hats that I mentioned earlier require me to read in some capacity, and not only to read a decent chunk of material, but also to comprehend what I'm reading so that I can use it, engage with it, and transform it in meaningful ways in the work that I'm doing. I'm often asked, how do I manage to read so much with such a full schedule? I should say outright that I'm not a particularly fast reader. I just think that the way that I think about my reading is different than a lot of people. So that's what we're going to be unpacking today. Because of all those hats that I mentioned earlier, I might have to take breaks as I film this video. You might see a couple of costume changes here and there, so we'll see, bear with me, but we're gonna get through a list of some different ways to think about your reading and perhaps give you a new lens in which to think about your reading so that what time you do have in your day you can use maybe more effectively than you already are. So let's get into it. First off, I should say that when I'm talking about reading, I'm specifically talking about engaging with the actual text. Now, I'm not one of those people that thinks audiobooks don't count as reading, but I do think that audiobooks give you a different kind of experience than reading an actual physical text, whether that's, on a PDF, or for me personally, I like physical books. There's actually some evidence that what we read on a screen, like the conversion of pixels to brain, doesn't register as well. It's more difficult to retain what we read than what we're reading in terms of ink on a page. And also, I just prefer books aesthetically. I like the way they smell. I like holding them in my hand. I've been reading for much longer than ebooks and Kindles and these sorts of things have been out. So for me, there's a nostalgic bonus that comes with having a physical book. I like to hold it. I like to smell it. I like to turn the pages. I like to be able to look at the book and see how far into the book I am. These are silly preferences maybe, but for me, I find that they add just that much intrinsic motivation to engaging with the book, to picking it up and reading it. When you're listening to an audiobook, it's an immersive experience, right? You're listening to the story, and for me, the experience is perhaps more atmospheric. Though sometimes I find when I'm listening to an audiobook, usually my attention is also engaged in other places. Maybe I'm doing the dishes, or maybe I'm laying in my bed with my eyes closed. The likelihood of me slipping out of the story at parts and not being able to necessarily pick up on when I slip out are higher than if I have a physical text. I'm a lot more clued into how I'm tracking the words when I have the physical text in front of me. Furthermore, being able to see the words gives me a level of specificity with the text that I don't have via the audiobook. We have all of these what's the word? I can't think of it. I'll pop it in here because I know it'll come up later. It's like phonetic something. It's really homophones. There we go. There are homophones that might come up in an audiobook that if you were reading the text you would know exactly what it is, that you might not necessarily pick up on when you're listening in audio form. So and there are other benefits of having a physical text, which we will get into later on in this episode. This first piece of advice is pretty obvious. It's one that I've seen lots of other places, but it still goes worth saying. Replace other entertainment with reading. I think this is easier said than done. It's just a matter of switching your routines a little bit, making it easier for yourself to pick up a book than it is to pick up some other form of entertainment. So for example, if you find yourself picking up your phone throughout the day and doing some mindless scrolling, something that you feel like you would like to replace anyway, one thing you can do is to set a book in a place where you usually set your phone, and then put your phone someplace where your mind isn't automatically going to, like, you have to think about where you put it, right? Sometimes I'll put my phone in, there's like a windowsill that is out of the way, and these places you have to switch them up, because if you get used to going over to that windowsill, that out of the way windowsill, then it doesn't work anymore. So you might have to get a little creative, you know, like putting your phone on top of your fridge, or if it's in your office, you know, like maybe behind your computer or something. Find a place to make your phone less accessible, make the book more accessible, put it someplace really welcoming and inviting. There's a lot to be said for even just a small chunk of time reading. If you have like 2 minutes, 5 minutes, you can still get through a page or so, and these add up over time, and they might keep you invested in the story or in the piece of information that you're engaging with throughout your day. For me, reading is my primary form of entertainment. There are a couple of things that I do that I like to do alongside other things. I'm a big knitter, but for me, I'm never just knitting, whereas reading is something that I allow myself to do exclusively. Like when I'm reading, I can only read. I allow myself that. That's a luxury. I think a lot of us might feel that uninterrupted, devoted time in our day and age is in fact a luxury. Now, you don't need to make reading your primary entertainment in order to get good, solid stuff out of what you're reading. I have a couple more tips that go with this one that can just boost the time that you do have. So even if you're just using little snippets throughout your day, there are ways in which to make those snippets mean more over time. Number 2 is I like to layer my reading. I'm usually not reading one thing at a time, and that's because different mind states lend themselves to different kind of reading material. Usually I have a nonfiction book that I'm reading and a fiction book. And there is some crossover between these genres, but the way that I generally think about my nonfiction reading is things that are a little bit more heavy, dense, dry, things that are information first versus story first with certain kinds of fiction. Now, sometimes I'll be reading a piece of nonfiction that feels more story first, so like a memoir, or for me, a craft book. I can just devour those. So I don't class this in the same kind of category when I'm talking about like nonfiction. At the same time, there are certain fiction books that I read that are just heavier, denser. I'm reading them not necessarily for the experience of story, but because I want to understand why other people read these books, or why they've been considered a classic, what it is that this person has done different in writing their story. And so then I'm reading that piece of fiction from a more analytical lens. So I would class that in terms of like more like my nonfiction kind of categorization here. But basically what I'm doing when I'm layering my reading, I'll read both usually on any given day. I prioritize reading the heavier stuff early on in the day when my brain is still fresh, energized, active. When I'm feeling sleepier, I'm in a slightly more dreamy state, then I really like to grab my fiction. And sometimes, you know, this is really bendy, right? A Sunday morning, like I might be feeling sleepy all day and I'm only reading fiction, okay? But having the ability to layer my reading and pick different things up at different times helps me to stay involved and invested in what's happening. And also I can comfortably set things aside, like, okay, I'm not going to read this nonfiction book today. That's okay. It's not on deadline. I'll pick it up when I have more energy on Monday morning. Now, let's talk about how to get more out of your reading, because sometimes we do find ourselves needing or wanting to read books that are a little more they're a little much, okay? They're books, we have good reasons for reading them, but they might be really dry, they might be really repetitive. Usually these are like the books that we're reading through them for information, right? We're trying to stretch our thinking capacity, or we're trying to stretch our knowledge base on something. It can be really hard, especially if you have any sort of distractions in your life, if you have a hard time staying focused in general. You need a way to channel your attention into the text that you're reading. No, you don't need to be superhuman to do this. You'll see lots of people on the internet now loving annotation, There's a good reason for that. When you annotate a text, you are drawing your attention down into the actual words on the page. And if you get a little boost about, like, you know, a colored gel pen underlining a sentence, if you enjoy that, you're going to be looking for that, and that requires you to actually pay attention to what you're doing. If you're able to delineate the most important statement in a paragraph, you're going to have an easier time following the narrative, the argument that's being made. These are the sorts of things that I find slipping out of my mind when I'm only half engaged with the text. I might understand what's being said in the moment that I'm reading it, but being able to draw through the arguments over time so I have the big picture understanding of why these different statements are being said where they are, that makes a huge difference on my ability to retain the information that I'm reading and then to use it in ways that are new or interesting in what I'm writing, what I'm teaching. So annotation is super helpful. Now, if you have a library book and you can't write in the book, there are other methods for this. There's like cute little plastic tabs people use. I don't like plastic a lot. I don't like having to buy something over and over again. I like to use these. These are book darts. They're like these little metal, cute little darts. You see they've got this flap on the back side. You just slide it over the page, and this little dart points to the line that you're emphasizing. They're stainless, so you can use them in library books without fear of damaging them. You can pull them out when you're done. I have a little ritual around them too, where once I finish reading a book, I go through the darts, I find what was I doing? Did I want this quote to be written down? Is there a word that I didn't know that I now need to look up? And so I have a ritual. After I finish my book, I'll go through, look at each book dart, pull it out, put it back in this little case. As for writing down quotes, that brings me to the third piece, which is keeping a commonplace journal. A lot of people use these. They're pretty popular in the bookish realm these days, and for good reason. Everybody's going to use their commonplace book differently, but as for myself, I like keeping a book log at the front. I have little notes for myself, like if I DNF a book, I'll make note of that. If I have notes written in the commonplace, I do a little tab. I jot down like the genre. That's just a way of giving me a sense of my reading habits, and also it's a really great reference. Now, a lot of people in a commonplace book, they'll keep quotes, right? I often keep quotes. Sometimes I will put really specific vocabulary usages in here. Sometimes I will make reflections. Like if I read a book, I might jot down the basic argument and how I feel about it, things that I would like to engage more deeply, this sort of thing. So this gives me the chance to reiterate, to further recognize whether I comprehended what I read, and it's also a great starting point of inspiration for other things that I want to work on going forward. As I was editing this video, it occurred to me that no conversation about nourishing a reading habit is complete without talking about goals. There's this really unfortunate attitude in the cyber world around books and reading goals that seems to orient around quantity. Either you see people focusing on the number of books they want to read in the year, or in order to get around the reading shorter books to get more books read, people might look to the numbers of pages that they read in the year. But thinking about quantity at all is a very limited scope in terms of setting goals for your reading habits. Quantity can be helpful if what you're trying to do is maintain a level of consistency, but just because you're reading a lot doesn't mean that you're reading well. Instead, we can create qualitative goals for ourselves, which analyze the way that we read now, how we want to deepen our reading experience, broaden our relationship with the world of literature, explore new information through books. All of these things can be engaged with in a deep and relational and intelligent way through the goals that we set for ourselves. In short, we can set goals for ourselves that help motivate us and move us further along and where we really want to be in our internal felt sense of our reading journey, as opposed to being some sort of self-flagellation device just to look good on social media or something. When we engage with our reading from a relational standpoint, then the reading that we're doing actually nourishes us. We become more interesting people because we're penetrating parts of our minds, our psyches, parts of the world in new ways, and leaning into the complexity available and engaging with new and interesting material. There are two levels at which I think about goal setting for my reading habits. I have short-term goals and I have long-term goals. And within each of those categories, I have different kinds of reading goals depending on what I'm hoping to accomplish with my reading. So as somebody who is an aspiring novelist, in the long-term future, I would like to read through the complete works of Haruki Murakami, Octavia Butler, and Ursula K. Le Guin, because these are three authors whose work I really admire. I would love to write within their lineage. And so I want to track through how they've developed as a writer within the lens of their publication history, what makes the difference between like a fresh, talented writer and somebody that really knows what they're doing. Another long-term goal that I've set for myself is to read through my TBR bookshelf. You can see it back here. This is the extent of my TBR bookshelf. It's a very limited space because I don't want to feel overwhelmed by it. I've set it up this way so that it feels like a nice cache of really interesting material. The stuff that I keep on that bookshelf feels really fresh, it's interesting, like they have that glimmer of wonder for me, and if I have too many of those, you kind of lose that sense, right? This particular goal is a running one. Really, it's a framework that I've set for myself, and that basic framework looks like the physical extent of that shelf. You know, I've got some books horizontally stacked. I can't go beyond that specific shelf, otherwise I'm breaking my rules. But there's not an end goal in mind for these either. Now, if I notice that one book I've had for years and years and years and I've not picked it up, I might just bring it to the front of my queue. But overall, this is a loose framework that I've set for myself in order to invite me into exploring new topics, new subject material that I think would be particularly interesting if I could include them in the other work that I'm doing in various writing projects. The other long-term goal that I have for myself is just to be a continuing participant in the book club that I'm a part of. I've got a group of friends, we meet every month to talk about books, like it's a book club. I don't have to explain this to you guys. But I think about this as a long-term goal because that continuing participation piece is important. Like, this is a broad framework that I then bring down into a daily framework. And actually, all of my long-term goals work this way. Big goal filters into daily goal. On any given day, I'm reading a little bit from each of those big long-term goals on a daily level. And there's a lot of flexibility here, depending on what I'm needing, when I need to actually complete a book, whether I need to actually complete a book. So some things that I'm considering, for example, the book club, that's like a non-negotiable. I'm participating in it. I'm not necessarily always going to be reading books I want. I think this is a good experience for me, and I love the opportunity to talk about books with people, to bitch about the book if I want to pick the book apart and analyze it, whatever. So what I do for this particular daily goal is just to look at the day when we're meeting, and I take the number of days from where I'm at now and apply that to the page count. So I take how many pages are there, do I need to read by the time we meet, divide that by the number of days that I have, that's my page count. Right now we're reading The Signature of All Things by Elizabeth Gilbert, and I'm reading 15 pages a day in order to meet that goal. Last month, our book, I was reading 8 pages a day. So because that was a very small page count and the pages were small too, I was also able to have a simultaneous page count goal in the nonfiction book that I'm reading, which, like, all of these TBR books are basically nonfiction. They're pretty dense. Not all of them are dense, but for the most part, there's like new material. I'm having to work through it slowly, so I might have a page count that's like 10 pages a day. Right now, because I have to read so much to stay caught up with The Signature of All Things every day, I'm just reading a little bit. The nonfiction book I'm reading right now is really dense and dry too, so I'm just like maybe a small section, like 2 or 3 pages a day. Eventually, I'm going to get bored of that pace. I'm going to need to finish the book. So I imagine that once I finish my book club book, I'm just going to dig my teeth into that nonfiction book, maybe read like 10 pages to 20 pages a day so I can get through it. As for the fiction books that I'm reading in those aforementioned authors, Haruki Murakami, Octavia Butler, Ursula K. Le Guin, I'm like intermingling. I rotate between those authors. I'll read a series of a book consecutively, and I'm just reading what I can, basically. It's the last book that I read of the day. It's like my dessert reading. And often I read a lot more of that than anything else, even though I'm not setting any particular page count for that goal, just because I'm enjoying myself so much, and it's the last thing that I do for the day, and I kind of have until I finish my nighttime writing session, until I blow out the candle and go to sleep at night. So that's the basic breakdown of the goal structure that I use. As you can see, there's a really nice balance between structure and discipline, and freedom and fluidity and flexibility. And each one of my goals is doing something for me personally and ultimately works with my own rhythms around the reading in a really natural and organic way. I always like to read just before bed. I sleep better if I read just before bed. There's a trick to this, like it's not just any kind of reading. Like the lighting has to be right, the aesthetics have to be right, the book has to be right. It has to be a fiction book, it has to feel a little bit yummy. I need warm light, it needs to be dark everywhere else. I like to light a candle because the beeswax smells really nice and it feels nourishing and comforting, and I can just immerse myself in the story and feel like there's, like this little bubble of story. This is the extent of my attention. I can just sort of drop into the story, enjoy it, savor it, and often I find myself reading for a good chunk of time and getting a lot out of my reading when I do that as well. And then I'm sleepy, I get a good night's sleep because I've primed my dreaming mind with some good story. I know this one's not going to work for everyone, but you might surprise yourself. You might find that taking a little bit of time, maybe getting into bed a little bit earlier and performing this ritual for yourself actually gives you back time and energy that you didn't think you had before. Ultimately, the only way to change your current habits to get more out of the time that you have is to experiment. So of all of these different ideas that I just gave you here, none of them are going to work unless you try something. Your life is not going to be perfectly matched up to mine. Like there are some things that I've suggested here that probably won't work for you, but if there's any little piece here that resonated with you, that sounded like it might be fun to try, just take it, run with it, grab it, fit it into your life somehow, and see what happens. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and subscribe. You can check out my other work at dreamthewilderness.substack.com. There you'll find my writings on astrological musings and other ecological adjacent explorations. I'm currently writing an essay series exploring the ecology of the zodiac. That's been a lot of fun, and if you're interested either in astrology or ecology, I think you'll find a lot to enjoy and unpack there. You can also sign up for a one-on-one astrological birth chart reading with me there. We can work together, unpack the story that's happening in your life, go a little bit deeper in the symbols there, and also just have a really nice place to view the circumstances of your life through a lens of beauty. Like sometimes we just need that. I look forward to hearing from you, working with you potentially. I hope you enjoy your day. Until next time. So this first piece of obvious, I'm gonna wait a moment, make sure that we can easily